Hey, good evening. What's going on, folks? Welcome to Bible study. Hopefully, everybody can see me and hear me and all the things. So excited to be with you guys tonight and to continue our study. So, if you guys can hear me and see me, please let me know. If you can't, let me know that as well. If it looks like my mouth is just moving, let me know. But if it's your first time here, my name is Philip Godfrey. And so this is weekly Bible study. Weekly Bible study is built off of the scriptures in Matthew 6:33, where here the Messiah is speaking, and he tells us, seek ye first the kingdom of the Father and his righteousness, and all things shall be added unto you. So we gather to do just that, to see, seek, and serve the kingdom of the Father. All right. And so I want to thank you guys for being here on Sundays. The flow is a little different, but if you have any prayer requests or any comments or questions, anything like that, please feel free to put those in the chat throughout the evening. And I look over periodically and will address or address those questions, and I'll pray for the prayer requests at the end of the night. I'm going to pray for us real quick, and then we'll jump into the study for tonight. So, Father, we thank you for this opportunity to gather together again. I pray, Father, that your word will go forward unhindered and unchecked by any outside force. I pray, Father, that the word would you would speak directly from your throne into the hearts of your people, that I would simply be a vessel, that I would decrease completely, and that you would increase fully, Father. And I pray that you would soften our hearts right now, that our hearts would be prepared to receive your word as seed, and that seed would be planted in a fertile soil and produce 30, 60, and 100-fold in the lives of your people. I pray that as your word promises, that miracle signs and wonders will follow your word as it goes forth. And I pray that you would continue to set us ablaze for you, Father, set us on fire for you. And I ask that as we go through your word tonight, Father, that it would just create a deeper hunger and thirst for the things of you, and really understanding your nature, knowing your heart, and really seeking those things out. We love you, praise you, and we pray all these things in your son's Yahushua's name. Amen. All right. So we're going to be continuing our study series that we started at the beginning of this year, entitled From Creation to Revelation. We're walking through the entirety of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. And so tonight we'll be looking at the entirety of the book of Daniel. As a reminder, we are, these studies are a little bit more higher level than what some of the ones in the past have been. So please, as always, go back and read and study for yourself. I could be telling you anything. I'm not, but I could be, and so I don't want you guys to just lean on me and just take everything I say as law. Please go back and confirm these things for yourself. All right. I do my best to share with you what the Spirit shares with me, but the revelation should be coming directly from the Holy Spirit. All right. So as we jump into the book of Daniel, I like to give an overview of the book before we always get started with a new book. And so the book of Daniel is written by Daniel, the prophet Daniel. Daniel lives during the time of the exile of the Babylonians. So we just looked at Ezekiel. Before that, we looked at Lamentations. And before that, we were in the book of Jeremiah. And so we looked at these books, and we saw that the Father was prophesying that there would be a captivity coming and the fall of Judah for the things that they had done, and the sins and transgressions and iniquities that they had committed. And so now we are seeing the fulfillment of that, through a piece of that through the book of Daniel, because Daniel is a part of the first wave of that exile out of Judah that happens. And then Daniel, as he gets into Babylon, he begins to kind of assimilate, or be assimilated, forcefully, some would say, into the ways of the Babylonians, the ways of the Chaldeans. And so the Father favors Daniel in that season, and he is raised up to be a leader in this foreign government, right? And essentially, that is what the first half of the book of Daniel kind of shows us. It shows us a little bit more about Daniel, about the season of life where he's in the leadership position throughout the reigns of these kings, and also introduces us to some of his friends as well, which we'll look at. And then as we move into the second half of the book, roughly chapter 7 through 12, then we began to see Daniel having these visions and prophetic visions of the end times, of the times of the end, where the Father is giving him insight and really opening his eyes and teaching him and showing him the things that are to come in the future. And so let's go ahead and jump in with chapter 1. Hopefully everybody is with me. All right. Nobody's told me they can't hear me, so I'm assuming that you can. So as we move into chapter one, the first thing that we see here is that the writer is setting the timeline. Okay, so for what is going on, it tells us that in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, so Jehoiakim was a king of Judah. So in the third year of his reign is when Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came and took over or besieged, is what the text says, besieged Jerusalem. He came and Um, he overthrew Jehoiakim and he took control of Jerusalem. And so, with this siege, there was an exodus of Jews that went into Babylon. The text also mentions here that there were some vessels that were taken out of the Father's house, out of the temple in Jerusalem. And these vessels were taken into from Jerusalem into Shinar in the land of Babylon, into the house of Nebuchadnezzar's God. So, this is automatic. This is a bit of information that's important. It'll come into play later, but what it's showing us here is that Nebuchadnezzar was a person who, even though he was being used by the Father, by the Most High, he was not a follower of the Most High. And so he was operating in idolatry. He was operating in disobedience to the ways of the Father. Granted, these weren't his ways because he wasn't given the instructions by the Father, but he was operating under a system of idolatry, a system of these false gods. And he took some of the things out of the Father's house and put them in his false God's house. This, like I said, that'll become important in a few chapters. But now that the Jews are in exile and they are in Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar is now looking for leaders from the tribe of Judah. He's looking for leaders from them that he can assimilate into his government. And essentially, these leaders would then teach the other Jews the ways and things of the ways of the Babylonians. And so he sets a leader of his over all the Jews, and he tells him to identify those of Judah who were good looking. I think his text says like well favored, without blemish. So they were good looking, they were skilled in wisdom, knowledge, understanding science, and they could someone who could learn the language of the Chaldeans. And then it says that they also had to be able, so they had to have a certain type of presence about them. They had to be able to stand in the king's palace. And so Nebuchadnezzar is looking for these types of people to bring them into his government and teach them the ways of the Babylonians, right? Because as we know, the Jews lived outside on the entirety of Israel. They lived outside of the kind of bounds of what was going on around them. They were given instructions by the Father, and the rest of the world was kind of doing whatever they wanted to do. And so now that they are no longer in that place of freedom, they are now being forced into the ways of everyone else, the heathens that were around them, the ways that they wanted so bad, they're being forced into following those ways. And so essentially, this is a 3-year program that Nebuchadnezzar has kind of set aside where everything will be provided for them. And as they learn and demonstrated what they needed to learn and demonstrate, then they would potentially be, elevated throughout the ranks. And as part of this provision or part of this program, there was provision where they would receive a daily portion of the king's meat and wine, and they were given to each of the students. This would be, I don't want to put words into the text, but this to me it sounds similar to like a leadership program at work or something like that, or like a fast track program of some sorts. And so Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who we know as Daniel and the Hebrew boys, they refused these rations. They refused the king's meat. They refused the wine that the king was offering them daily. And they stated that they postured their hearts that they would not defile themselves with those things that the king was offering them. And so Daniel asked the leader who had been appointed over him, the Babylonian leader, asked if he could not partake, if he could not engage in eating those things and defiling himself. And then after some back and forth, I'm leaving out some details, but after some back and forth, they agreed to a time of testing. And so they set aside 10 days where they would test Daniel and his friends versus the other Jews that had been chosen to be in this program. They were testing them against each other to see which ones looked better, the ones who ate the king's meat or the ones who didn't. And once these 10 days were over, what they found is that Daniel and his friends were better. They appeared better, kind of, it said like fairer flesh or fatter flesh. They appeared just more, I don't know. They just appear better than the others who had been partaking of these things that were ultimately defiling themselves. And so, essentially, from this point, we began to see the favor of the Father on Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. because they were then allowed to continue eating the way that they desired to eat, and not partake of the king's portion for the entirety of this program that they were in. And so, after, as the chapter ends, or at the end of this 3-year process, when the king called for all of those who had completed it to come and stand before him, the text tells us that none were found who were better than Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, because the Father had given them favor, he had given them knowledge, he had given them skill, he had given them wisdom, and he had given Daniel understanding in all visions and dreams. The text even says that they were found to be 10 times better than not only their peers, not only the people who were in school with them, essentially. No, they were found to be 10 times better than even the magicians, astrologers, the soothsayers who were already operating in the kingdom of Babylon. And so, as the chapter ends, we see that Daniel continued, and he continued to have influence and leadership in this government, but he also was able to reign, or not reign, but lead in the government until the days of King Cyrus. All right. So hopefully everybody understands what we got going on there. As we move into chapter 2, what we see here is Nebuchadnezzar. He has a troubling dream. And so he has this dream. It says in the 2nd year of his reign as king. And so the king called all his normal people in to him to kind of help him interpret the dream. He calls the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, the Chaldeans. And the Chaldeans are like people who are given over into science, I believe. And so essentially what this looks like, kind of from our point of view, is something happens that we don't understand, and we go to Google and end up on some kind of like new age website or something like that. Or even asking Google sometimes is the same kind of process here. And so Nebuchadnezzar goes through that. But the issue here is that the king, normally, if he had a dream, he would tell them the dream and then the people would interpret it. Well, the king couldn't remember the dream. And so he not only needed the people to interpret the dream, he also needed the people to tell him the dream, and then interpret it. Well, needless to say, they were unable to do that. They do not have those type of abilities. And this upsets the kings, and he sends out a decree in order to kill all the wise men of Babylon. But the wise men of Babylon include Daniel and his buddies, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And so when Daniel hears what's supposed to happen, he asks for an opportunity to speak to the king. He asks for audience with the king, and request that the king give them some time to get the interpretation for him. And the king allows this. So Daniel goes back to his friends. Daniel goes back to his friends. He actually say he goes to his house. So I don't know if they were all living together or what. I don't know all the details. But Daniel goes back to his friends, and they pray that the Father would reveal to them these things concerning this secret. And the Father answers them by revealing these things to Daniel in a dream. And then Daniel is excited. He's ecstatic. He's giving the Father all the glory. He's thanking the Father. He's speaking blessings unto the Father. And he goes back into the presence of the king. And he tells them that his normal process, those soothsayers and magicians and astrologers, couldn't have gotten him the answer that he desired, because there is a Yahuwah, there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets. This is important for us to remember. There are times when our normal process, the ways of the world, will not yield the answers that we desire. They will not yield the revelation that we are looking for, because secrets are only given from the Father in heaven. He's the one who is responsible for revelation of secrets. The ways of the world are not responsible for revealing to you the secret things of the Father, his kingdom, and heaven. All right. And so Daniel then goes and he tells Nebuchadnezzar the dream. He tells him that in the dream he saw an image, like a statue, essentially. He saw an image, and the image had a head of gold. It had a breast and arms of silver, a belly and thighs of brass, and legs of iron, and feet of iron and clay. And then in the dream also there was a stone that was made without man's hands, that came and struck the feet. It hit the feet of the image and broke the feet into pieces. Then, after he told him the dream, Daniel begins to give him the interpretation. And so the image here represents a system, essentially, but it represents a group of kingdoms. All right. And so Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar are the first kingdom. They're the head with the head of gold. They are the kingdom of gold. There is a kingdom that arises after them that are inferior to them, and this kingdom is the kingdom of silver. After that, there will be another one that arises in the same manner, and they won't have as much, they won't be as great as the silver kingdom. And this is the kingdom of brass. And each of these kingdoms will rule all over the earth. And the fourth kingdom will then come, and it will be as strong as iron, but just like the feet were iron and clay, a mixture, there the kingdom will be divided. There will be some strength in the kingdom, but also some weakness and brokenness. It also mentions that this kingdom here, this fourth kingdom that is of iron, mix themselves with the seed of men. All right. And in these days, the Father, which in these days when all this is going on, the kingdom of iron, all these other kingdoms are permeating the earth. The Father is going to set up his kingdom, and that kingdom will come against and overtake these kingdoms. And that kingdom, the Father's kingdom, will not be destroyed, but it will break and consume all the powers and all the dominions of these other kingdoms, and the kingdom of heaven will stand forever. And so, as chapter 2 ends, we see that Nebuchadnezzar receives this interpretation, and then then goes on to decree that Daniel's God is a God of gods and a revealer of secrets. So now Nebuchadnezzar is acknowledging the Father as the Most High. The king then elevates Daniel and makes him ruler over all of Babylon and a governor. So yeah, like a governor over the wise men of Babylon. And then Daniel requests that the king also elevate his friends, which he does. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they are all elevated and serving in leadership in the king's court of that territory in Babylon. All right. Moving into chapter 3, what we see here is Nebuchadnezzar. He now sets up a golden image, a statue, a golden image, and he brings all the rulers and leaders to the dedication of this idol that he has created. And he makes this decree during this, I guess, this dedication service. He makes this decree that whenever someone hears this specific music played, that they are to bow down and worship this idol. And whoever does not do this that same hour, they will be thrown to the fiery furnace. One thing that stands out to me here, and this is a little bit of a rabbit hole, but one thing that stands out to me here is the fact that Nebuchadnezzar was going to throw these people into the fiery furnace that same hour. And then as we continue to move throughout the text, we see the Father decreeing that he will move on certain situations in that same hour. And so this is why oftentimes when I pray, I'm praying for the Father to do things in that same hour, because we have precedent of him moving just as quickly as the evil tried to come upon the people. But that's free for you. All right. And so some of the Chaldean leaders, they didn't really like Daniel's friends. They didn't like Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And so they come to the king and they tell him that, hey, these Hebrew boys, these Jews that you set in this leadership position, they aren't following your decree, which makes him furious. They're not bowing down and worshiping your idol. So he brings them into his presence and asks them about this, and they tell him that they will not worship his gods nor serve his gods, and they are not afraid of the backlash because they are sure that whatever he tries to do to them, that the Father is able to deliver them. And if he doesn't, even if he don't, they are still not going to serve his God nor worship his idols. And my question here is, have we taken that position? Have we taken the position? That's the topic for today. Have we taken the position of refusing idolatry in this way? They told the king. Now there are some they're lowly leaders, they're exiles, they're captors basically. And here they are in the presence of the king, and they're not cowering down. They're telling him to his face that it doesn't matter what you try to do to me. My Father is able to deliver me from you and anything you try to put me through. And if he doesn't, I'm still not going to do things your way. I'm going to be obedient to the ways of the Father no matter what. And that just got me fired up when I read it. I mean, maybe it doesn't fire you up. I don't know. But at this point, Nebuchadnezzar hears this and he's heated. He tells the people to heat the furnace 7 times hotter than normal. They tie up Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They throw them into the furnace, and the furnace was so hot, the fire was so hot that the people who threw them into the furnace died. Now let's think about this for a second. The furnace is so hot that the people who threw them into the furnace died, but they didn't die as they were getting thrown into the furnace. Shouldn't that have tipped off somebody that, like, hey, something a little off here? Like, maybe we should rethink this. But anyway, so they throw them into the furnace, and then It says that hastily, like quickly, the king stands up and he's frantic and he's like, hey, he's asking questions like, hey, didn't we throw three people in there who were tied up? And they're like, yeah. He's like, well, now he sees four people. He sees four men walking around in the fire, untied, and one of them looks like the son of God, looks like the son of Yahuwah. So the king comes and he gets them from the fire. And the text tells us that the fire had no power over their bodies, that there was not a hair on their head that was singed, and they didn't even smell like fire. So not only were they in the fiery furnace, not only did the father, did the son of the Messiah come into the fiery furnace to be with them in that furnace, but they walked around in the furnace. The people who threw them in there died, but here they are walking around inside of the furnace. They're walking around inside of the furnace, and there was no even not a smell of fire on them. Nothing on them was singed. Nothing on them had caught on fire, was burned. And after this, the king decrees that anyone who speaks against the God of the Hebrew boys, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, will be cut into pieces, and their houses will be made a dunghill, because he acknowledges that there is no other God that can deliver like this. And then he promotes Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael in Babylon. So my question here is, do we really believe that there is no other God, that there is no other Father, that there is no other whatever out there who can deliver like this? That whatever your fiery furnace situation is, that not only is he in the fiery furnace with you, but when you come out, you won't even smell, you won't look like what you were just in. You won't look like what you've been through. You won't smell like what you've been through. There will be no residue of what you have been through on your life. Do we believe that he is that father for us? That's a question that only you can answer. So now let's move into chapter 4. All right. So chapter 4 begins with Nebuchadnezzar again acknowledging the Father as the Most High. He calls him the High God, the Most High God, and that his kingdom has an everlasting kingdom. All right. The king then goes on to discuss a vision that he's had. And similar to last time, he calls in the magicians, the astrologers, and all those people. They couldn't interpret this dream, even though this time he told them the dream, but Daniel could interpret it. All right. So the king tells Daniel the dream, and the dream is that there's a big tree in the earth, and the tree grew and was strong. The tree reached unto heaven. The tree had fruit, was beautiful. Animals, dwelled and found shade in the tree and all that. And the people were fed from the tree. Like, this was a fantastic tree. It was an amazing tree. And it was a sight to see from all the ends of the earth. But a messenger in the vision, the messenger came from heaven and cut down the tree, cut off the branches, shook the leaves, everything. But it left the stump and the roots in the earth. And so then the dream shifts to talking about the tree as a man. At first it was just talking about a tree, but now it's referring to the tree as a man, and says that this man's portion will be with the beast in the grass, and the heart his heart will be changed from a man's heart to a beast's heart, and he will dwell in this way for 7 years. And all of this will happen so that all will know that the Most High is the one who rules even among the kingdoms of men. And this is one of the prevailing themes of the entire book of Daniel, is the Father's interventions even into the humanity of humans, like even into the governments of humans, the ways of human, like his intervention, and how he's continuing to work and orchestrate even all of it on such a deep and intimate level. All right. So the king asked Daniel for this interpretation, and Daniel is initially hesitant to provide it, but the king presses him, and so he goes on and he provides it. And the interpretation is this: the interpretation is that the tree represents the king, Nebuchadnezzar, and even though the king has grown and become great in the earth, he will be driven from men and forced to live among the beasts of the earth. That he will even eat grass like a cow for 7 years. The text says oxen. He will eat grass like a cow for 7 years. But after this time period has passed, just like the stump and the roots were left in the earth, he will be given his kingdom back after he has learned the ways of heavens and who actually rules what. And so Daniel tells the king, as this part of the chapter ends, Daniel's telling the king, like, hey, This is how you can maybe if consider these things like break off your sins and live in righteousness, like come into right standing with the Father, and maybe and continuing to be merciful to the, or not continue, but be merciful to the poor, and maybe that will break some of these iniquities off. Maybe that will kind of shift the Father's judgment away from you a bit and lengthen your peace, and like you won't have to go through these things in such a so soon, I guess I would say. And so as we see here, beginning in verse 28, the chapter then goes on to show us that the fulfillment of this vision that Daniel has just interpreted, where it says 12 months later, Nebuchadnezzar was walking through his palace, and he was talking about how great his house was. He was talking about how great his kingdom was, how great all the things were that he had built in his power. And a voice from heaven speaks in that moment and says that the kingdom has been taken from him. And that same hour, that same hour, he was driven from men. He was driven from his kingdom. He was no longer the king, and he ate grass like an animal. It says that he was there so long in the wilderness, like eating like a beast and being like an animal, that his hair looked like feathers and his nails looked like claws. But after the appointed time, after the 7 year time period had passed, he looked unto heaven, and his understanding returned unto him, and he blessed the Most High. It says that Nebuchadnezzar had blessed the Most High and acknowledged that people are nothing, and the Father does according to his will. And so, as the chapter ends, we see him praising the Father, honoring the Father, the King of heaven, and acknowledging that he is able to abase all of those who operate in pride. So, this reveals to us how Nebuchadnezzar ended up in this situation in the first place. It was his pride that had puffed his heart up so great, so big, and so much that he felt like he was the one who had done all these things. And when he got to that point, the Father cut him down like a tree and then led him through a season to where he was humbled, and he was so humbled that he then acknowledged the Father as the Most High. Think how he has had to fall from following, serving all these other false gods, these idols, these images and all these things, these fake deities. He's serving all these things until the point to where he's in the wilderness like a, I don't want, like a man child, I guess, but I guess he wasn't a child. But like a caveman, just like looking. He said his skin was like, his hair was like feathers, and his nails were like claws. He looked like a man, but also like a bird almost. He did that. He had to go through that season because of the pride. So when the text tells you that the Father humbles the pride, be we should be aware of that, and we shouldn't be going around decreeing that we are proud. But anyway, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Let's move into chapter 5. So, chapter 5 then introduces us to Belshazzar. All right. The text identifies Belshazzar as Nebuchadnezzar's son, but he's actually his grandson, from what I found, as I was studying this out. So, he's actually his grandson. And so, Belshazzar is having a feast, and he invites a bunch of people to the feast, and then he takes the gold vessels, the silverware, the bowls, the all those things, the cups. He takes those things that were taken from the Father's house in Jerusalem, the tabernacle, when it was raided. He takes those things, and then he then allows the people who he invited to this feast to eat off of these golden vessels that were taken from the Father's house. And during this time, while they're in this feast, it said the people ate, they drank, and they praised the gods of silver, the gods of gold, brass, iron, wood, and stone. So they're eating off of the Father's vessels, the blessed vessels from the temple of Jerusalem, and they are decreeing blessings over these false gods in the same venue, in the same space, in the same voice, with the same mouths, I guess. And so scripture tells us that same hour, we see the same hour popping up again, but that same hour there came a finger of a man's hand, and this finger is writing on the wall of the room that they're in, where they're having this feast. And so Belshazzar, as most of us would have been, he's freaking out. And he's so afraid that the text says that his knees began to shake, his knees began to buckle, or his knees began to knock, and he wet himself. Now, maybe that's a little bit of interpretation, like what's he say? Leniency. But it says that his joints of his loins were loose. To me, that sounds like he wet himself. I don't know. You let me know. But he's terribly afraid. He's terrified. So he calls the soothsayers, he calls the astrologers, he goes through the same process that the previous kings went through. He calls them, but they couldn't interpret what the hand had written on the wall. The queen then tells him that there's a man who can interpret these things, who has wisdom from the Father. And so he's also helped Nebuchadnezzar previously. And so Daniel, Belshazzar calls Daniel. Daniel comes into the Belshazzar's presence and Belshazzar, the king, tells him that if he can interpret what's on the wall, then he get all these, like, presents and gifts and all these things. Daniel told him to keep his gifts, but he'll tell him what was going on. So essentially, what happens is, well, Daniel tells him that he's gonna tell him what's going on, and he didn't have to give him the presents. But it wasn't before Daniel reminded him of how the father had humbled Nebuchadnezzar, and reminds him that he knew that this has happened, but he still allowed himself to be full of pride, and this is why the hand has come, and the father is humbling him in this moment. But he goes on to tell him that the writing states that the father has numbered his kingdom and finished it, and that his kingdom will be divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And after this, it tells us that Belshazzar elevates Daniel to the third position in the kingdom. And that same night, Belshazzar was killed and Darius became king. So we saw the immediate fulfillment of the interpretation of the prophetic act that had gone forward there. And now the kingdom, just like Daniel has decreed, has been given over to the Medes and the Persians. All right. This brings us into chapter 6, where now we see that Darius is the king and he's setting up his own hierarchy in the kingdom. And the way that he chooses to do this is that he has 120 princes who rule over, kind of rule over sections of the kingdom. And over those 120 princes, he has three presidents, and Daniel is one of these three presidents. And so his text goes on to tell us that Daniel was so good at what he did that Darius was considering making him the leader of all of it, instead of having these three presidents, or making him the leader and then having two presidents and then 120. Well, this made the other presidents and some of the princes upset. And so they began to look for a way to come against Daniel and ultimately kind of, have something against him, but they couldn't find one. So eventually they get the idea that, hey, the only way that they are going to actually find fault against Daniel is to come at him as it relates to the law of his God. And so what they did then, they go in and they trick Darius. Well, I guess they don't trick him, but they didn't tell him all the details. They go in and they get Darius to sign a decree that for the next 30 days, no one could pray, essentially. So they said they could not ask of anything from any God or any man for 30 days. And the text goes on to tell us that when Daniel knew that Darius had signed this decree into law, he went into his house and he prayed with his window open 3 times a day. That's how bold Daniel was, and that's how like strong of a stance he was taking against the king and his decrees when those things were wrong. And so a lot of times, especially now, we live in a time where people are like, you got to follow the laws of the land and all those things. But we see that Daniel, didn't do that. We see that Daniel and also Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah did not do those things. Now, when the laws of the land are just and they are in alignment with the ways of the Father, then sure. But if those laws are not in alignment with the ways of the Father, if they are not just, then we are not required by the Bible to follow those laws just because a king decreed them. We see that Daniel is pushing back here. And so the leaders go back to Darius and they tell him that Daniel's not doing what he decreed. He's being disobedient. And so Darius he's sad. And that I'm assuming he's sad because he got caught up in this trap. I don't know why he's sad, but that's why I believe he's sad. But he's forced by the leaders and by his word to throw Daniel in the lion's den. And so, but before he puts him in the lion's den, he tells Daniel that the God who he serves will deliver him. The God who he serves will deliver him. This is the posture of the king who is having to put him through this season of testing and trial. All right. And so Daniel then goes into the lion's den. They shut the den and seal it and all those things. Darius goes home and spends the night fasting for Daniel and hoping that the Father will deliver him. And then in the morning, he hurries into the lion's den and asks Daniel if Yahuwah had delivered him or not. He hears Daniel respond from the other side that the Father has shut the lion's mouths and that they did not hurt him. So Daniel is taken from the den. And get this, the men who had accused him were thrown into the lions den instead with their entire families. And the text tells us that the lions overcame them. This is interesting to me. What did the men who accused Daniel, what did their children do? What did their wives do? What did their families do? Why were they eaten by lions? Well, the reality is, especially men, the reality is there are decisions that we make that affect our entire family, our entire home, our entire generation. And so we need to make the decisions that are in alignment with the ways of the Father so that our families don't have to deal with the fruit of our actions. And I know people are going to say, oh, and Jeremiah says that everybody will pay for their own sins. Yes. And Jeremiah, I mean, yes, they will pay for their own sins. However, we also see precedent here that when the father fell, the entire family fell. And we see precedent over in Genesis. I mean, not in Genesis, in the New Testament, I think it's Acts 10 with Cornelius, that when the father gets saved, the entire family got saved. So we see precedent going both ways. All right. So that's not what we're here to talk about right now. And so as the chapter ends, after Daniel has been, the father has delivered him from the mouth of the lion, the chapter ends and Darius makes a decree that in every domain, every dominion that he rules, that the people should fear the God of Daniel. They should fear Yahuwah. And he decrees that he is the living God who delivers, rescues, works signs and wonders. And Daniel continues to prosper during the reign of Darius and into the reign of Cyrus. All right. Does that, everybody still with me? I'm assuming that we are. You guys are a quiet bunch today. But that's all right. I'm gonna keep talking. As we move into chapter 7, we see here that Daniel here is having a vision. So as I spoke a little bit about earlier, the first 6 chapters are kind of like historical, just giving us a little bit more information about Daniel and some of the reigns or the him navigating through the leadership and through the seasons of being in exile in Babylon. As we move into chapter 7, what we'll begin to see is Daniel having more prophetic vision for the end times. Okay. And so in chapter 7, Daniel's having a vision in the first year that Belshazzar was king of Babylon. So this is going back a bit. And the way that this is written to me, it reads like it reads to me like Daniel didn't write it, but that could just be me. But anyway, it talks about that at that time Daniel had a dream, and the dream was about 4 beasts. And the first beast that he saw in the dream was like a lion that had eagle's wings and stood upon feet as a man, and it had a man's heart. The second beast was like a bear. The third was like a leopard, which had wings on its back and 4 heads. The fourth beast was dreadful, according to the text, and it had iron teeth, and it was different than all the other beasts. It also had 10 horns. Then, while Daniel was looking at that beast with the horns, it said that another little horn came up on the beast and overtook 3 of the original 10 horns. And then the little horn had eyes like a man and a mouth that speaks. All right. We'll get to that in a second. But the text then pivots and tells us that as Daniel was looking, he saw that these thrones were being cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit upon his throne. And he had a garment on that was white as snow, and his hair on his head was like pure wool. It says that the Ancient of Days' throne, who we know to be the Father, his Ancient of Days' throne was like a fiery flame, and his wheels were as burning fire. This is interesting to me because as we looked at the book of Ezekiel, it talks about the wheels in the heavens, right? And so now he's saying that the wheels they were as burning fire, and there was a great multitude of people that stood before him and ministered before the Ancient of Days. And it talks about this is the judgment event where there was a book that was open, the books that were open, and people were judged from the books. All right. So Daniel continues watching, and he's continuing in this vision, and he said he hears the voice of the little horn speaking now. And he watched as that little horn spoke, and he watched as the beast was slain. The fourth beast was slain, and his body was destroyed and given to the burning flame. And all the other beasts had their dominion taken away from them, but their lives were prolonged for a season, according to the scriptures. And in another dream, Daniel sees another one that he describes as the Son of Man coming to the Ancient of Days and being given from the Ancient of Days glory, dominion, and a kingdom that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. All right. Now, we got through all that. So now we see that there's an interpretation given of what Daniel has seen. And so the beasts that Daniel has seen were four kings. Each of these beasts is a king, which is a kingdom. But the saints of the Most High will take the kingdom in the end and possess it forever. But then Daniel is said that there is a truth of the fourth beast, which was different from all the other beasts. This beast is a kingdom that will drive that will be different. Well, I don't know why. Hold on, wait. Yes, this beast is a kingdom that will be different and tread down the entirety of the earth. So this fourth beast, whereas the other beasts were kingdoms and they kind of had rulership of certain territories, it's telling us that this fourth beast is gonna overrun the entirety of the earth. That is gonna be the fourth beast will have rule over the entirety of the earth in a period of time. And in this kingdom, the fourth beast kingdom, there will be 10 kings that arise. And after them, there will be another one that arises, the little horn. There'll be another king that arises and overtake three of the original 10 kings. Then this little horn will speak against the Most High and will war against the saints and prevail over them for a season. All right. But when judgment comes, that's where we saw the throne and the Ancient of Days. That when judgment comes, the dominion of this little horn will be taken away, and all of that kingdom and dominion will be given to the saints of the Most High. And finally, all the dominions will serve and obey Him, the Most High. And so Daniel kept these things to himself because they were heavy. That's what we see as the chapter ends. So remember this about the little king and all that. So remember this about the four beasts. We're going to make sense in a second. As we move into Daniel chapter 8, Daniel's having another vision. This time it tells us that this vision was in the third year of King Belshazzar's reign. In chapter 7, that vision was in the first year. This one is in the third year. And so the vision was of a ram, and this ram has two horns. They were uneven. I don't know why that's important, but the horns of the ram were uneven. And so this ram was pushing, it says this ram was pushing to the west, the north, and the south. So this ram was like expanding. This ram signifies a kingdom. I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. And this kingdom was expanding to the west, the north, and the south. And the kingdom had great power, and this ram, who signifies a king, did whatever he wanted to. All right. And after this ram, Daniel sees a goat coming up against the ram. The goat only had one horn between his eyes, and he came down against the ram hard and overtook the ram. And it says that none could deliver the ram out of the hand of this goat. And the goat continued to from there become very great. All right. And so once he was strong, once the goat had overtaken and was elevated, then the horn, the one horn that the goat had between his eyes, was broken and became four horns. And out of all of these horns, and out of one of these horns came a little one, which became great toward the south and the east. So now we have the entirety that these kingdoms are kind of spreading out over all of the directions, north, south, east, and west. And so it says that the horn, the little horn that had come out of these other ones, it transgressed the things of the fathers, took away the daily sacrifice, and cast the truth to the ground. And Daniel was told that the daily sacrifice at this point in time would stop for 2,300 days. And so we're not going to get into the numbers as we get into this. That's way deeper than we need to go. But next, what we see is Daniel receiving the interpretation of the ram and the goat that we just saw. And so, in this interpretation and understanding is given to him from Gabriel, the archangel. And so, the ram with the two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. Well, remember, Media. The text told us in a few chapters previously that the kingdom was going to be given over to the Medes and the Persians after Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar's reign was over, right? And we saw that happen with Belshazzar. He died, and then Darius took over, which introduced the Medias and the Persians, right? And so the goat here is the king of Greece. So now we have Median Persian as the ram, and the goat is the king of Greece. And so after the first king, which is raised up in Greece, there will be four kingdoms that come up out of the nation of Greece, but they won't have the same power. And in the latter time of their kingdom, there will be one more king who will come up with a strong countenance and understands dark sentences. What this means, the King James Version says dark sentences. And what that means is that he's essentially very cunning, very crafty in how he navigates the system. And this king will destroy the mighty and the holy people and prosper through his policy. But he will be doing this, he will be, you know, spearheading all of this destruction by peace. And so this is strange because typically you would think that destruction would go forward by force or by war or by kind of all those types of things. But no, this is saying that destruction will be taking place at this point in time when this person is leading by peace. That's how he will be led. That's how he will be leading, or the cloak that he will be using, to get all these, to kind of navigate all these things that are happening. As the chapter ends, Daniel is told to shut up the vision because it is for the future. And it says that Daniel was astonished and overwhelmed with the vision. And it says that he became sick for a number of days because of that was how heavy or how weighty the what he had seen and what he had been shown was to him. And as we move into chapter 9, Daniel receives some revelation. It says, now in the first year of Darius as king, regarding the prophecy of Jeremiah, that 70 years of desolation should take place in Jerusalem from the time that the temples was destroyed. So if you remember Jeremiah, we saw that where Jeremiah prophesied that after the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem, which did not happen in the first exile where Daniel left, but as that temple was destroyed, there would be 70 years where the land would be desolate, that no one would be able to live there, and all these types of things. Well, Daniel is now getting some revelation or some more insight and understanding about that 70-year period, and that they were nearing the end of that 70-year period. And so this sends Daniel into a season of prayer, and seeking the Father's face with fasting. And so Daniel is praying here and asking the Father to turn his fury away from Jerusalem and shine his face upon the sanctuary again. He asked the Father to hear him, to forgive them, and to not defer for his city and his people. And the text tells us that while Daniel is praying, Gabriel here comes and brings him an answer. And so Gabriel goes on to tell him that because Daniel had asked the question, like, well, what's going to be the time of this happen? Like, does this really have to happen? Can this thing kind of be put off or be lessened for a period of time, something like that? Daniel's praying those types of prayers. Well, Gabriel comes and tells him that 70 weeks of time has been decreed on the people, on the city of Jerusalem, to cleanse the transgression and to bring everlasting righteousness to the people and to the city, the land. Well, the 70 weeks is broken up, though it's broken up. So from the time of the commandment to the restoration, or for the commandment to restore Jerusalem to the Messiah, will be counted as 7 weeks. All right. And then 62 weeks will go forth, and the city will be rebuilt during tumultuous times, is what the text says. And then after these 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off, and the city will again be destroyed. And the leader of the destruction will confirm a covenant for 1 week, which is the final week of the 70 weeks. And so there are a lot of different kind of schools of thought about the 70 weeks. You can study it out yourself. But there are people that believe that like the 7 weeks are 7 year periods of time, so essentially 49 years, and then certain things happen, and then 62 weeks times 7 or whatever that is, and then now we're waiting for this 7 year period of time. I don't really know. I kind of lean a certain way on that, but that's not for me to kind of share with you. But please study that out and see where you kind of end up for yourself. But that's the prophecy of the 70 weeks that a lot of people talk about, especially as we get close deeper into the latter days. All right. Which brings us into chapter 10, where now we have Daniel having a vision during the third year of King Cyrus of Persia. Again, Darius was a Mede, and Cyrus is a Persian. But the vision was for an appointed time that was far into the future. And so Daniel receives this vision. He receives this vision. It says that he went into a season of prayer and mourning at what he saw. And he mourned for 3 weeks. He didn't eat pleasant bread or meat or wine during this period of time. And this is where people get the Daniel fast from. But the Daniel fast is not a fast, just in case you're wondering. And Daniel was not fasting. Daniel was fasting because of the weight of what he saw and what he was exposed to. it, he was mourning, he was sad. That's why he was fasting. But anyway, we're not going to get on that. And it tells us that on the 24th day of the month that Daniel was doing this, he sees a vision of an angel coming to him. And this angel tells him that from the moment that he set his heart to seek the Father and to seek understanding regarding the vision that he had, that the angel was dispatched, but he was held up by the demonic prince of Persia. Remember, the Persians are the ones who are leading at this period of time. That's what the Cyrus is the Persian. And so this teaches us that there are demonic entities that rule over territories. And so there is a demonic entity that rules over your region potentially, or your nation potentially, just like we see here. And this hasn't changed. That hierarchy of the devil's system, or Hasatan, that the hierarchy of his system has not changed. And the hierarchy of the father system has not changed either. And so we never mind. And so Daniel, he sees this vision of this angel coming to him, and the angel has been held up. But Michael, the archangel, came to fight the prince of Persia, the demonic prince of Persia, while Daniel's angel comes and gives him this interpretation. And I believe that they believe the angel here is giving him the interpretation as Gabriel, but don't quote me on that. And so the angel tells Daniel that the vision he has received is what will happen to his people in the latter days. And after he speaks with Daniel, he tells him that he will have to return to fight the prince of Persia until the prince of Greece comes. And that these are in remember that Persia and Greece are the horns that were mentioned earlier in the previous book that the previous chapters that we just looked at. So all of this is tying together. A lot of times people, I've seen people teach Daniel and they haven't taught like the continuity of it. But here, these are the same. The princes that they are fighting in the heavenlies are the same ones who are coming into rulership here in the natural world. And so, just like he's fighting the prince of Persia, and he's telling him that, hey, I got to go fight Greece after I finish with Persia, it's because the text tells us that the Grecian kingdom will rise after the Persian kingdom, and then that kingdom is going to have these kings, and then all these different types of things. The little horn, and the horn's going to break into four, and then there's another little horn that rises up. All these things go together. All right. So these aren't necessarily isolated visions that Daniel is having. The conversation that Daniel is having with this angel continues in the chapter 11, where the angel is telling Daniel that there will be three more Persian kings that rise to power, and the fourth will be far richer than all the others. Well, you remember when we saw the beast, and it had the horns, and then there was a fourth horn that comes up. Well, so the king will rise to power. He'll be far richer than all the others. And through his strength and riches, this king of Persia is going to fight against Greece. And after this, a mighty king will rise who will have great dominion and do whatever he wants. But at that point, when he reaches his peak, this king that comes after this, when he reaches his peak of power, his kingdom is going to be broken apart and divide into four parts, and it will not have the authority that it once had. This is where the ram came, and it had that horn, and the horn, when the ram overcame the goat, no, the goat overcame the ram, the goat had the horn, and the horn breaks, and then it breaks into four pieces. This is what is being spoken about here. And so the king of the south will increase in power, and one of his leaders will become even greater than the king himself. This begins a battle that we see throughout chapter 11 between the kings of the south and the kings of the north. And this battle continues to escalate until the time of the end, when the king of the south comes and attacks the king of the north, and the king of the north enters into the territory of Israel, the land of Israel. He stops between the holy mountain and the sea and pitches his tent there. But when this happens, it tells us that this is a sign that his reign has suddenly come to an end, and no one will no longer help him. As we move into chapter 12, what we see is that Michael, who's the great prince who stands for the children of the Father's people, he stands up and goes to war against this kingdom, against this king that is camping in the land of Israel. And it tells us that there will be trouble during that period of time like never before. I just realized that means that someone is camping in the land of Israel who should not be there when the end times comes. But that's neither here nor there. And so Michael is fighting for them, and everyone, the text tells us that everyone who is found, everyone whose name is found written in the book of life will be delivered from this time of great trouble. And even some of those who asleep will be awoken, they will awake to everlasting life. But there will be others who are asleep who will be awoken to everlasting damnation and everlasting darkness. Daniel, as chapter 12 ends, Daniel is told to shut up the book until the end of the time, and that this will be in the last days. This will be a time, or the latter days. This will be a time where many will run to and fro from here to there. The knowledge will be increased. And Daniel asked him, he says, how will all these things end? And it goes on to say that he's told that he is to seal these things until the time of the end, and only those who are wise will know what these things mean. But from that time, he tells him that from that time to the time when the daily sacrifices stop and the abomination of desolation happens, there will be 1290 days. But that Daniel should not worry, because for him there will be rest, and he will be raised up. He will be raised up to everlasting life after that point. And so there are lots of schools of thought about these 1290 days and what's kind of going on here. But hey, that's not for me to determine for you. What I would recommend is that the book of Daniel is very especially when we get over into the prophecies, it's very deep. The meanings aren't what we see on face. And so while we've talked about these things at a high level, I encourage you to go read into them for yourself, really study out some of these prophecies, and let me know. Let me know down in the comments where you land on some of these things. Like, what is the Father revealing to you about these things are to happen? Who are some of these nations? Where are these nations now? Is this actually true? Is this what we're seeing today? But the reason why this is important, and I'll say this and then we'll be done. The reason why this is important, the reason why biblical prophecy is so imperative, is because the Father has left us with clues and left us with a timeline. But the reality is that the text tells us that there will be seasons and leaders who will shift the times and the seasons. They will try to pull us away from the true timeline of the Father. And if we don't know the timeline, and we believe that we are at different places in history than we really are, then we are subject to making mistakes and aligning ourselves with things that are actually against the Father in that season that we're actually living through. And so I encourage us all to really to read our Bibles, number one, but to really try our best to ask the Father to give us revelation and understanding of the prophetic visions and these things for the future, if nothing else, so that we could have an accurate understanding of where we are in history. There's a lot going on, and we see these things happening prophetically in the text that we're walking through, but it doesn't really matter if we think we're somewhere that we're not. Um, and the whole goal of the enemy is to pull you away and to cloak it to where we don't actually see what the Father's saying and what he's doing and whether it is true or not. And so thank you guys for hanging out with us. Let me what's the comments coming in? Feel like we could have spent 3 weeks in Daniel. I'm gonna be honest with you. We could spend a year in every book of the Bible, even Obadiah. We could spend, I'll be transparent that this is very challenging to to me, at least, to do this at a high level. But hey, maybe next year, maybe we can go deep on some of these things and spend the entire year going through a book like Isaiah or Daniel or something like that. Who knows? But yes, these things are very, very deep. There are a lot of kind of things going on in the periphery, but as we read throughout the entirety of the Bible, it will make sense, and it's easier to put kind of connections together, because Daniel is talking and confirming the things that Jeremiah is speaking about, that Ezekiel is talking about. Then when we get over into Revelation is going to be confirming the things that Daniel saw, and so all these things begin to work together and really confirm the fact that the Bible is telling us one story. The Bible is one book. It's telling us one story, and that story is continuous. I know that a lot of times we have been taught, or we believe, or people say nowadays that the Bible is a lie, it contradicts itself. None of those things are true. The Bible confirms itself over and over again, but we really have to read it and understand what's going on to see that happen. So another way to think of that. Yes, yeah, the disciples did think that they were also in the end times. And so the best way I've heard this said is that no matter where you are in history, the reality is this: you are in your end times. um Time is a construct that we live in, but that the Father does not dwell in. And so Father's not moving throughout our existence in the way that we think, or even desire. He's not thinking about the fact that you're 40 or the fact that you're 80. He's not considering either of those things, because he does not dwell in time. He's not bound by time. He created time and operates outside of time. Therefore, he rules over time. But the whole end times and are we in the last days and all these different things, I don't think it's, how do I say this? It's important for us to know and understand. It's also important for us to understand that there are ways that we need to be living right now. There are principles, that there are precepts, and there are practices that we need to be instituting right now. There's a kingdom that we need to be aligning ourselves with right now, no matter if tomorrow's the last day on earth or not, no matter if tomorrow's your last day on earth or not, that we need to live our lives in alignment with the text. We need to live our lives in obedience to the Father, and we need to know his heart, we need to know his nature, and we need to serve him for who he is. And so when you do that, it doesn't matter where you are in history. It doesn't matter what the prophecy says. I'm always on the right side. If I have done the work, if I have aligned myself, if I've been obedient, if I've committed to seeking his kingdom first, and his righteousness in all things will be added unto us. And so, yes, it is important to know. It is important to know this, so you won't be fooled. It's difficult to fool somebody who actually has knowledge. My parents used to always say, if people want to get somebody, they'll put it in a book. Like, so if people want to hide things from you, they hide it in a way to where you can easily be fooled. But if you are one that searches out, for example, if you're one that reads, it's hard for people to hide things from you in a book. Well, you're going to read the book, you're going to find it. And so, yes, we need to know these things, we need to search them out. But the reality is that more important than all of that, we need to be obedient. The end times don't matter if you get there and you're on the wrong side. The end times don't matter if you get there and you've blasphemed the Father, and that you don't hear well done. You hear, I never knew you. None of this other stuff matters if you hear, I never knew you. You know what I'm saying? So we need to focus on hearing, well done. Let me, I don't know why I went down that rabbit hole. How long would it take to go through the Bible, really breaking down each book? The reality is, it would take all of our lives going through the Bible, breaking down each book, because the text tells us that it's alive. So every time that you read something, there and have revelation of it, there's new revelation available. So the deeper you go, the deeper you're able to go, and the more you understand, the more understanding becomes available to you. So it's something that you will never understand the totality of the text, because in that case, you would understand the Father, and none of us are able to do that. So, yeah, that's good. Live it out each day how you should do it. When the man asked Christ how to get eternal life, Christ said the commandments in Matthew 19:17. Is this still true? If he said that that's what the man was supposed to do, then it's still true. All right, folks. That's all I got for us. Let me pray for us real quick, and I will head out. So, this for this week, we will be looking at um, Hosea, And then on Wednesday, we're looking at Hosea, and then so you can go ahead and read Hosea. And then after that, we will be looking at Joe. Let's see, make sure I didn't put it in my notes. My apologies. It'll be looking at Joel and Amos. Okay. So we'll be looking at, yeah, we're looking at Hosea on Wednesday. So go ahead and read Hosea. And then on Friday, we'll be looking at Joel and Amos together. All right. So, Father, I thank you for your word that is going forth. I pray that I've executed the assignment with excellence. I pray that you will be elevated, Father, and that your kingdom will be lifted high, and that you will be glorified, that it will be all about you. I pray that your people you would give them a deeper hunger and thirst for your word. I pray that as they go back and read about that you would even open up and give them revelation that they didn't have prior. And so, Father, I thank you. I praise you, and I pray that you would keep your people, and ultimately, Father, that they would live their lives, that we would live our lives in such a way that we know your word, that we do your word, that we follow your word, and that by our living our lives, that others come into alignment with you, that they see us and they say, "What must I do to know more about this Father that you serve, to be a member of this family that you have had the opportunity to come into?" So we thank you. We thank you for your blood, the blood of your Son that was shed for us on Calvary. And I pray, Father, that you would move throughout the situations of your people in this time and in this season and this week, and you would hear their cries, and that you would answer them in a way that only you can. They will know that it is you, and that you love them, and that you keep them, and that you are seeking for them, and that you hear them, that you haven't forsaken them, Father. We love you, and we pray these things in your Son Yahushua's name. Amen. All right, folks. If you feel led to give, you can do that. But other than that, I'll see you guys next week. If I don't see you this week, remember, the Father loves you. I love you. I love you. But more importantly than that, the Father loves you. Let him love you. Okay. Start before you're ready and don't stop. I'll see you guys next time.